I'm Ari Redboard, and this is TRM Talks. I am Global Head of Policy at TRM Labs. At TRM, we provide blockchain intelligence software to support law enforcement investigations and to help financial institutions and cryptocurrency businesses mitigate financial crime risk within the emerging digital asset economy. Prior to joining TRM, I spent 15 years in the U.S. federal government, first as a prosecutor at the Department of Justice, and then as a Treasury Department official, where I worked to safeguard the financial system against terrorist financiers, weapons of mass destruction proliferators, drug kingpins, and other rogue actors. On TRM Talks, I sit down with business leaders, policymakers, investigators, and friends from across the crypto ecosystem who are working to build a safer financial system. Today, I am joined by Eleanor Terrett, former Fox Business producer and co-founder of the Crypto in America podcast. But first, inside the lab, where I share data-driven insights from our blockchain intelligence team. Earlier this year, President Donald Trump signed an executive order establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. The goal is to leverage Bitcoin assets seized through criminal or civil asset forfeiture without imposing additional costs on taxpayers. The EO also establishes a separate digital asset stockpile, which will manage forfeited digital assets other than Bitcoin, such as Ethereum, XRP, ADA, and Solana. The US government is among the largest sovereign holders of Bitcoin, with assets primarily acquired through law enforcement seizures of ill-gotten digital assets. In 2023 alone, U.S. law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, IRSCI, U.S. Secret Service, DEA, U.S. Postal Inspector Service, Homeland Security Investigations, and others, reported seizing and/or forfeiting over $3 billion in digital assets. The numbers are detailed in annual reports from the DOJ and the U.S. Treasury Department. By utilizing blockchain intelligence tools and trained federal agents, this strategy maximizes efficiency, empowering federal law enforcement agencies to generate billions in seized funds while compensating victims and funding law enforcement initiatives. In fact, simply focusing on the administration's priorities, border security, Chinese money laundering networks, and cartels, law enforcement agencies can utilize blockchain intelligence to seize and forfeit funds. For much more on this executive order and the strategic Bitcoin reserve, read our full report at trmlabs.com/resources. Now I sit down with Eleanor Terrett. Eleanor, I am truly excited to have you on TRM Talks and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Ari. Me too.
There's so much happening. I feel like you are the go-to journalist in this space right now on what's happening in regulation and policy. Tell me a little bit about your journey and how we got to where we are today.
Sure. Yes. So I got here in a sort of conventional and unconventional way at the same time. So I grew up actually in a broadcast family. My dad is a business reporter. My mom is a former traffic reporter. So grew up in that atmosphere. And for a long time, I thought maybe I wanted to go into PR actually, because I've always been a good writer, a good communicator, and the broadcast journalism route, it's tough. So that's a whole career path in and of itself. And when I applied to Fox Business, this was my first job application out of college. And at the time, I didn't realize that there were two separate channels. There's the news channel. They have a whole ton now. But Fox Business was the sister channel of Fox News. And I got the call and I said, oh, you're going to be working with Maria Bartiromo and Stuart Varney. You're going to be a green room production assistant, which means you're going to be running their scripts to them and you're going to be helping their guests to hair and makeup. Very foot in the door job, but I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I was all for it. And my dad at the time said, Stuart Varney is an excellent broadcaster. Maria Bartiromo is a legend. She was the first female on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. You're going to have a great time. And sure enough, I did. I did that for 6 months. And then I moved up to be a production assistant on the 5 a.m. morning show. So me coming out of college, that was a perfect time for me because I was working overnight. So I would come into the city at 1 a.m. Ari and leave at 9 a.m. So it was like the reverse commute, right? And then they put me down as a field producer at the New York Stock Exchange. And so I'd kind of been picking up bits and pieces of how to cover business news and how to think about the stock market. But I didn't really get my crash course in business and markets until I went down to the stock exchange. And that was 18 months of my time down there, which was incredible. It was, first of all, if you've been to the New York Stock Exchange, you know how such an institution, right? And I was on the floor at our Fox Business booth with another reporter for 18 months covering markets in real time. And I remember jobs day, Fed day. There were all these days on the calendar that business people, traders, they watch so closely because the markets fluctuate so much around it. And I just got to love it. I wanted to be a markets reporter. I didn't wasn't really thinking about crypto at the time. And then COVID hit. So they brought us all home from the stock exchange and I was doing remote field producing for about a year and a half. And then a position with Charlie Gasparino opened up. Now, Charlie was my former boss. He's a veteran financial journalist. He was at the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, Fox Business, and he was my mentor as well. So just someone who is so storied in this industry, taught me how to write really well, taught me how to just be the best journalist I can possibly be. And from there, we kind of got into crypto reporting because he's covered Wall Street his whole life. So with the SEC, right? This was 4 years ago. So this was like right as Gary Gensler was coming in. It was right as crypto was being cracked down upon. There was no rules of the road. Ripple was sued, and that's how we got into crypto reporting was the SEC versus Ripple case. So we looked into it. We conducted a whole bunch of interviews. We talked to people involved, and we wrote a 10,000 word opus, we called it, on the regulatory riddles featuring SEC versus Ripple, but talking about the broader problem of there not being a regulatory framework for digital assets. But my experience at Fox Business and everything I learned to get me here today, I credit them and I credit Charlie with everything that I have now. So it's been a really interesting 9 years.
Let's kind of talk a little bit about what are the stories right now that you are sort of most focused on. And I'm happy to go through each of the branches, but like, on the Hill, you are covering every day what is happening with these different legislative activity, stablecoins right now, but there's going to be much more. Talk me through how you're thinking about these different hot topics.
Yes. So you're right. It's a big team effort, I think. And the SEC is probably the one that I'm watching the closest right now in the sense that they are trying to hammer out exactly how to think about where digital assets fit in securities laws. And obviously, Congress is going to be a massive part of that too, with the market structure bills and the stablecoin legislation. Now, you might think that those two are relatively different, but actually, if you talk to the congressman involved, French Hill, Tom Emmer actually just told us this on his podcast. They're two sides of the same coin, right? Stablecoin and market structure, and you can't pass one without the other. Now, does that mean they're going to pass, legislatively together? I don't know, but they're related in that way. And I think while they're focusing on getting the legislation through and making the bills the same in both the House and the Senate, the SEC is holding these roundtables, right? And this is something we've never seen before because the other administration, the SEC specifically, ignored crypto until they couldn't ignore it anymore. And then they regulated by enforcing the law against all these crypto companies and executives. And now we're having industry players come into the SEC, like actually the headquarters, like these going into the SEC building in Washington, D.C. to sit down and talk about how digital assets may or may not be part of securities laws and how do we think about that going forward. The collaboration there.
Just coincidentally, I was there with the TRM team on Monday, met with the crypto task force, and that was probably my biggest takeaway is that when Hester took over when the task force was assembled, when she took over, her first thing was like, hey, the previous administration didn't engage at all. We're going to engage like crazy. And they've really, really embraced these conversations. They're really looking to us, to industry, to help inform their work.
And someone else said to me, this should be the norm, not the exception. And if you go to any other country, places in Europe, places in Asia, the collaboration between industry and between regulators is much more open, much more transparent. And that's something else that I've noticed the SEC has been doing is being super transparent with who they meet with, what those meetings are about. Like I can go on sec.com, go to the crypto task force tab, and I can look at what you talked about during your meeting.
And that's the level of transparency I think they want. It's interesting. I think there's this narrative that they've moved away from enforcement actions. And I think that's because everyone associates enforcement with like the cases that we all know over the last few years, right? Ripple, Coinbase, Uniswap. But that's enforcement actions against lawful crypto businesses, right? Like that are building the ecosystem. What I've heard from them is that like, no, we're laser focused on enforcement, but actually fraud and scams and the real bad actors that are presenting a threat to the technology, a threat to sort of growing the ecosystem, to innovation. And that's really what we heard. How does that feel to you?
100%. And I think if you look back at it in hindsight, what could the SEC have caught that they didn't if they had been paying attention to companies like FTX, companies like Three Arrows and Celsius. Instead, they were focusing more on players like Coinbase, who all they did was offer these cryptocurrencies that had no legal status, but the SEC wouldn't engage to create a status. They wouldn't rule make. And then Coinbase actually took them to court over that. They said, well, if you're not going to rule make, we're going to try and make you rule make because we're living in, and this is what Brad Garlinghouse of Ripple calls it, regulatory purgatory. Well, we don't know if we're doing something right. We don't know if we're doing something wrong because you won't talk to us as well. So, you're telling us we're breaking the law, but you're also not letting us come in and talk to you about it and try and figure out how to work with you to get around it.
So is the story right now at the SEC, which is a great place to start because it's really where you started in this space covering the Ripple case, is the task force and sort of the work they're doing like the story right now out of the SEC?
Out of the SEC, I would
Yeah.
say yes. I think it plays into the puzzle of what everybody else is doing. We can get into the CFTC. They rolled back some restrictive crypto guidance kind of recently. The banking regulators as well. We saw much rollback from them in response to the deep banking hearings. The FDIC and the OCC have rolled back old rules that basically said, thanks, if you want to engage in crypto, you have to get our permission first. And while that on the face of it sounds okay, right? If you actually dig into the pause letters, the so-called pause letters, and the missives that were going out from the banking regulators to banks saying, we would prefer you not to get involved in the space. That's okay, but there was never any follow-up. So it just turned into 4 years of absolutely nothing happening and banks not being able to touch crypto. But also you've got this sort of side narrative of the SEC being like, crypto is bad. So all of a sudden you just got this entire administration who's telling an industry that you shouldn't engage in crypto. And so they didn't. But I think the banking side of things is going to be very interesting to watch how quickly you'll see, the big banks, JP Morgan. I guess JP Morgan is sort of already involved in blockchain technology. I wouldn't say crypto because Jamie Dimon still says that Bitcoin is a pet rock and would never get involved in that side of things, but the blockchain technology. And then, you've got Bank of America, you've got Morgan Stanley, you've got Goldman Sachs. Like, it'll be really interesting to see how the banks, especially with the stablecoin stuff, right? Like, that's a whole nother conversation, but how the banks start engaging in crypto and this thing that they just weren't allowed to do for so long.
It's absolutely coming. When people ask me sort of what's the biggest story today in crypto, they expect me to say something around the policy or regulatory, and it's this to me.
That landscape is changing rapidly.
There's another piece to this. Stablecoins are also front and center, from a regulatory policy perspective. You had Dante Disparte on the show most recently. Talk me through where you see sort of the stablecoin landscape.
Mostly on the Hill, I'd say, but also you're seeing much more interest in stablecoin in the private sector now too. And I would say that we've seen, said the other day, people are saying they want to launch their own stablecoins, right? Left, right, and center. It's almost like the
Wyoming.
meme coin. Yes. Well,
Yeah.
I was going to say the public sector too. I just think that it's such a cool idea. And when we were doing a press briefing with them, they talked about how they want their stablecoin to act like cash. They said that, and I didn't realize this, but for USDC, they will not allow you to buy certain products with USDC, one of those things being guns. And so there's restrictions on, I guess, what you can and can't get with USDC to an extent. I don't think that list is too extensive. But to their point, they said, we want to make it act as cash-like as possible. So you can use our stablecoin to buy, whether it's guns, whether it's marijuana, whatever the sort of controversial industry may be. So I thought that was quite interesting. But then you also get into the side of if a state is or a government body is issuing its own stablecoin, how are you veering out of CBDC territory? How are you separating those two things? So I think that's an interesting conversation. But then you're also seeing a lot of the private sector companies wanting to come out with their own stablecoins too. I feel like people are launching stablecoins now or say they're wanting to launch stablecoins in the same way that they wanted to launch meme coins a year or two ago.
You now have two bills in the House and the Senate. Eventually, they're going to have to be reconciled. Where are we and where are we headed there?
So we just saw the Stable Act, which is the House's stablecoin legislation, pass out of the House Financial Services Committee following a 13-hour marathon markup. And we'll add that it wasn't just the Stable Act they were marking up, but it was the bulk of it. And many, many, many amendments which didn't pass because obviously Republicans are the majority in the House and the Senate right now. So those amendments didn't make it. Many of them didn't. But basically what we have now is a We have two bills. We have the Genius Act that passed out of the Senate Banking Committee that's waiting floor time. And then we have the Stable Act, which I just mentioned, that's also waiting House floor time. Now, behind the scenes, I'm told it's going to be the next couple weeks will be about making those bills as similar as possible. And Brian Stile, who is the co-author of the Stable Act, said on stage a couple weeks ago that the bills are about 80% similar. There's 20% where there could be, we want to close the gap. And when I talked to him recently, he said there's some key differences, namely in how we treat the overseas stablecoin issuers and state pathways for being able to be regulated. Those are the two sort of main things. Then he said the others were just a bit like technical language and just, little things that we can come on board with. But he said the main priority is to get it done as quickly as possible. So I think what you'll see is a lot of work behind the scenes to make those bills similar. I think time is of the essence because Trump has requested that the both legislation, both market structure and stablecoins, be on his desk before the August recess. And now that's 4 months away. And you know how fast Congress moves, Ari.
Yes,
So
yes.
it is going to be a heavy lift. And I think that Congress is trying to figure out how to thread that needle.
If it's going to be stable coins, then market structure, anything else that you're sort of tracking that could be maybe not August, but within the next year or so out in terms of the crypto?
Yep. So the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve Bill, that is Bitcoin Maxi's probably favorite piece of legislation that may or may not get passed this year. That's something I'm watching too, only because I think Trump has come out, as you saw in the latest executive order. He mandated that there be a strategic Bitcoin reserve and a strategic digital asset stockpile. Now, those two things are different, and I can get into how they're different, but the strategic Bitcoin reserve, they are not going to sell any of their Bitcoin. And it's kind of unclear how much Bitcoin the government owns right now. The strategic Bitcoin reserve bill that has been floated by Senator Cynthia Lummis, who's a big Bitcoin supporter, and now has a House companion bill as well. I think it would be a heavy lift to get it through by the end of the year. And even Lummis herself has said she came up with this Bitcoin Act to basically have the government buy Bitcoin and put it on the balance sheet as a way to reduce our national debt. Now, she's very passionate about it. There's a companion House bill that has also been introduced, but even Lummis said that it's going to be a heavy lift to get something like that done imminently because there's a lot of education that has to go around it as well. There's a lot of people in Congress, unsurprisingly, who aren't as up to speed on the benefits of Bitcoin, right? I think when it is a question of money and what we're putting our financial budget, what we're putting our national budget towards, is it buying something that a lot of people in Congress don't really understand, or is it buying something that they are much more comfortable with, that they can touch like gold, right? It's a very 50-50 split, I think. People in Congress either love the idea or they hate it. And so that's something I'm definitely watching.
I thought the executive order was pretty elegant and tried to kind of thread the needle between those two groups that you're talking about, like, the touch gold versus sort of the Bitcoiner, in making it seized assets, basically made up of seized assets. And obviously an area that's really near and dear to my heart because we work with law enforcement, right? They leverage TRMs, blockchain intelligence, to track and trace and ultimately seize funds to be used in the strategic Bitcoin reserve. And I'd be remiss not to sort of ask an AML, illicit finance, a national security type question, because this is TRM Talks. Are you following that space, whether it's U.S. Treasury Department and some of the work happening there?
Well, we're watching in Congress right now. I think the legislation, the Stable Act and the Genius Act, specifically as it relates to stablecoins, I think market structure will be a little bit different. But how do we protect investors while also honoring the DeFi side of it, right? The right to privacy, the right to be able to transact and not feel like you're being surveilled by your government. And then also something else I'm looking at, which is a couple of weeks ago, former CFTC chairman Chris Giancarlo put out an op-ed. I believe it was in CoinDesk, but his writing partner was Chris Perkins, who's the head of Coin Fund. And they wrote this op-ed that said, we should kind of go back to privateering, which was this idea that occurred during the Revolutionary War where they would use the citizens to help them fight the war, basically, in the Revolutionary War. And now they're floating the idea that, mobilizing the private sector, who arguably have much better infrastructure, like you guys over at TRM, to be able to police and sort of surveil the bad actors in the space through this blockchain technology. Your technology is a lot better than the government, so why not use the private sector to help out?
Now, it's super well said. And you hit on so many of my favorite, most interesting topics. I cannot let you go without hearing about crypto in America. What are you doing? What does it entail?
Yeah, sure. So, Crypto in America is a weekly podcast and a newsletter that comes out 3 times a week, which is a bit ambitious. Now I'm actually doing it, but I love it. It's okay. Written by me, the newsletter. And basically, the premise is following how crypto is coming back to America after 4 years of being offshored by the regulation by enforcement agenda of the Biden administration. So, we're interviewing founders and builders who are making a conscious effort to come back to the United States. That's been a very interesting sort of segment of crypto in America that we've been focusing on. And the other part of it is talking to people who are actually creating the policy, like the Tom Emmers of the world. The main point here is that crypto is going to be part of the future in the US. It's part of the infrastructure, part of the economic financial system. And we're just highlighting the people who are making that happen and the people who are going to benefit from it. So if your listeners are interested, you guys can find us on Spotify and Apple and YouTube.
How did you guys decide to do this? How did you come together?
So it's interesting. And I think timing is everything in life. And this is a great example of that. So I had been ready to move on from Fox for a little bit, only because I just felt like I wasn't able to grow the way I wanted to there. And so I just happened to run into my now co host, Jacqueline Melanik, at Anthony Pompliano's Bitcoin Investor Week, which was about 2 months ago now. And she said, "How are you? What are you doing? What are your thoughts?" And I said, "Well, I'm getting closer and closer to moving on. I'm not entirely sure how that looks yet, but it's coming." And she said, "Well, you know what's really funny? I'm actually thinking of launching this podcast called Crypto in America. I actually already have a co-host. He's the general counsel at Say Blockchain. And we're going to call it Crypto in America. And it's going to be all about crypto policy, which is basically what you do. That's your thing. Would you like to come on board?" And I said, "Oh my goodness, that would be amazing. Can I think about it?" And she said, "You've got till Sunday because we're going to have a team call on Sunday." This was Friday.
That is
And I was like, "All right."
wild.
I was like, "I'll
Yeah.
have a decision for you then." And that's kind of how the ball started rolling. And actually, it was sort of built out, I'd say, 3/4 of the way when they brought me on board. So it was nice for someone who has had a structure in corporate America for 9 years to kind of go into something that was already structured. I think I bring my own branding and my own sort of pizzazz to it, as it were. But it's nice to go into something that wasn't just a total startup for me, because obviously I have had no experience in that field until now, and it's been great to have the support of people like Jacqueline, who actually has her own podcast on the side as well. So she's been the one who kind of coordinates it, and so that's been very useful.
That's amazing. When I saw the three of you sort of, join forces, that just felt really right to me.
Yeah. And it's been good in the sense that we all come from different expertises, I would say. So Gerald's obviously the legal mind, I'm the policy, and then Jacqueline has her Talking Tokens podcast where she interviews founders and builders. So she's got those relationships. So I think we all bring our own personalities, certainly, but also our own expertises to the interviews that we do on the podcast. So it's been a lot of fun. And I love working for myself. It's great. I recommend it to anybody who's thinking about doing it. Do it.
Amazing. I'm going to leave you with this because we're also fun and personal on the TRM Talks podcast. What are you into when you're not covering sort of every policy, regulatory, legislative? Your cat is famous on X for those who aren't sort of following you.
Cats, plural.
Yeah, cats, sorry. Cats, plural, are famous. But what is Ellie Terrett doing in the world when you're not sort of covering crypto policy and regulation?
Well, you mentioned my cats. They are a big part of my life. And the reason being is because I got into cat rescue a couple years ago. And I just, I found a love for that because I love animals, and cats are definitely not everybody's favorite animal, but I have learned to love them. They're a bit destructive, but they love me at the end of the day. So it's okay. I mean, at least I think they do. And I'm part of a rescue group on Facebook. So we go out, and there's a lot of stray cats. There's a community cat problem in this, at least in this area, definitely in this country, of people who just don't spay and neuter their cats. And so they go out, they get loose, they have kittens, and then there's this horrible stray cat problem. And I'm part of the group that goes out and traps them and gets them fixed and then puts them back out, or helps find them homes if they are adoptable. The cats are fun. And then I love going to the theater. I grew up a theater kid, as it were. I was part of my high school musicals. So I love going to Broadway. I feel very blessed, and I'm, not even an hour outside of Manhattan. So I get to do that quite a bit, which is great. And country music is also a thing I love. I love going to country concerts. So I was especially thrilled when the Bitcoin conference was in Nashville this past year. It's in Vegas this summer, but Nashville was great. And that was the first time I'd ever been. Got to see some live country, which was incredible.
Thank you so much for joining TRM Talks. And honestly, would love to have you on again as things develop, whether it's in Congress, whether it's in the executive branch, because wow, I mean, things are literally moving at the speed of the internet right now out there.
They really are. Thank you so much, Ari. It was such a pleasure joining you. I'd love to come back anytime. You're right. Everything is moving at the speed of light in Washington. So anytime you want me on, I'd be happy to join.
Should we break into do you hear the people
People sing,
sing a
the
song of angry men? Love it. That was a really fun, cool conversation. As I mentioned, I've been trying to get Ellie on the show for really a year and a half or so. And it was because of her ability to cover these really, really complex issues in a really sort of thoughtful way, and has really become the leading voice, whether it's sort of what's moving on Capitol Hill, what are regulators like the SEC and CFTC doing, and that expertise really shone through today. And it's really cool that she's obviously taking that experience, taking her success here, and now building her own thing. Couldn't be more excited to have Ellie, but really as a resource for so many people who are trying to understand what exactly is happening with stablecoins on Capitol Hill, what is happening with the CFTC task force, what's happening at the White House. To hear her talk about covering that summit was really, really cool. So biggest takeaway is it's really important to have these folks in this age of new media in the space, and great to hear from them on TRM Talks. On the next TRM Talks, I sit down with Binance's General Counsel, Eleanor Hughes, and the Head of Policy, Stephen McWhirter. If you love the show, leave a review wherever you're listening to it. And follow us on LinkedIn to get the latest news on crypto regulation, compliance, and investigations.
TRM Talks is brought to you by TRM Labs, the leading provider of blockchain intelligence and anti-money laundering software. This episode was produced in partnership with Voltage Productions. The music for this show was provided by Ecolix.
Now, let's get back to building.